From a culture of excellence standpoint, a former colleague of mine, many people may know the name Bruce Dinkins. Bruce Dinkins was a high school band director in South Carolina, and then he moved to Texas and he was very successful. And he used to have a sign in the front of his room that said, "To all who enter, you are subject to the relentless refining power of music through its uncompromising standards." And that statement really explained to the students the respect that we had for the music making process. So I think that part of that idea of culture and excellence has to be taught, and students have to understand that the whole idea of uncompromising standards is a synergistic process where we're all coming together to make for a good thing.
Welcome to Director's Circle, a podcast featuring insight from music educators and school leaders discussing their philosophies towards the administrative leadership of a comprehensive music program. I'm Doug Conrad, and today's guest is Mr. Scott Rush from Charleston, South Carolina. So sit back, pull out your copy of Habits of a Successful Band Director, and let's begin. Hello everybody, and welcome to Director's Circle. I'm Doug Conrad. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you are new to the podcast, we've been picking up a lot of new listeners in the past few weeks, and if you are enjoying the episodes, a couple ways that you can continue to stay on top of everything new that we're posting out is by going on over to Facebook, looking up the Facebook page under Director's Circle, and liking and subscribing to the page to get all updates on all future episodes and news related to the podcast. Other ways you can help in that effort are also going over to iTunes, Google Play Music, or even iHeartRadio and subscribing to the podcast, and even giving a 5-star review on iTunes to help us reach new listeners. Any support is greatly appreciated. When approaching the episode today, I was thinking about how I was going to do my intro, and I first thought about doing a story and telling you a little bit about the background I have here. So, whenever I graduated college back in 2010, doesn't feel like that long, but it has been, after that, a few years, I started substitute teaching in a particular district, and one of the parts of substitute teaching can sometimes be having long periods of monitoring classes or even just hall duty, which usually call for having a good book. And one of my friends who was a band director in that district, his name was Pat, and he had always lent me this book called Habits of a Successful Band Director. And it was a really interesting book because it was chock full of a wide array of topics dealing with band directing, from dealing with administration to budgeting to musical aspects and even pedagogical aspects. And it was just a great book because no matter where you turned into the book, you could always get a new idea. And even after that experience, as I entered teaching full-time, I now own a copy myself and address it from time to time, and am still implementing ideas from that book into my teaching practice. And with that book today, it's by a man named Scott Rush, who is actually our featured guest today. And Mr. Rush is a big advocate for music education, a well-known educator and author. And to tell you a little bit about him, he is currently the Director of Fine and Performing Arts in Dorchester District 2 in South Carolina, and is also the former director of bands at Wando High School in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. Under his direction, the Wando Band program achieved major accomplishments, including performing at the 2007 Midwest Clinic, being the recipients of the 2007 Sudler Flag of Honor, being two-time BOA Grand National finalist, and winning the South Carolina State 5A Marching Band Championships for 9 consecutive years. Mr. Rush is also the lead writer for the Habits series and has authored or co-authored 10 highly touted books, including Habits of a Successful Band Director, Habits of a Successful Musician, and Habits of a Significant Band Director for GIA Publications. Mr. Rush has served as president of the South Carolina Band Directors Association and is a former member of the board of directors for the National Band Association. In 2010, Mr. Rush was elected into the prestigious American Bandmasters Association, and in 2011, he was awarded the Band World Legion of Honor. In 2015, he was elected into the South Carolina Band Directors Association Hall of Fame, and in 2016, he was awarded the Edwin Franco Goldman Award by the ASBDA for his contributions to music education. Mr. Rush, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Doug, for the kind invitation to be on Director's Circle.
Yeah, I've been greatly looking forward to it. So to start things off, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and your professional background?
Well, I'm a horn player. I originally went to the University of South Carolina and also attended the New England Conservatory of Music in Boston for my master's degree. I taught as an adjunct professor at Kennesaw State University for a few years. And then I began public school teaching, and I taught middle school for 3 years and high school for 19 years, and 15 of those years were at Wando High School. And I'm beginning my 6th year in my current role.
Whenever you first left college, were you more focused on an educational track in your profession, or were you more focused on performance at first?
That's an interesting question. So when I was in high school, all I wanted to do was be a high school band director. And I actually had some folks who talked to me, and it was kind of interesting because their first comment was, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And I was very passionate about it. And through various sets of conversations, they said, "Are you sure you want to deal with young people?" And so through those conversations, I decided to pursue the performance route. And so when I first started, I had a performance degree in my undergraduate and my graduate degree. And there was something in that process, playing professionally. I played in a professional wooden quintet. I played in orchestras and obviously taught at the university level. But there was something missing, and I wasn't really sure what it was. And as I began to teach some camps with high school students, I quickly realized that that was the level that I always had the passion to teach. And when I decided to go into the classroom, I immediately felt at home. Like I felt like I had come home, if that makes sense.
We had a previous guest, Mr. Frank Parker. He's a band director from Quakertown, Pennsylvania, and he kind of had the same route too. When he first came out into college, he started out, in that performance track, and then gradually came back into teaching. So, whenever you entered back into teaching full time, specifically in public schools, was there anything from your background as a professional performer that influenced or affected your philosophy of how you went about teaching your students?
Well, I think we're a product of our experiences. You can only give away what you have. It's one of the reasons why we should never stop learning. But I really felt that my experiences in undergraduate and graduate school were incredibly valuable. And obviously, I had the opportunity to study with people like Frank Battisti at New England Conservatory and other mentors like Ben Zander and Pascal Verreau and Carl St. Clair. And being around those folks were just invaluable to bring into the teaching experience. And to this day, I value the folks who provided big shoulders on which to stand.
For sure. To talk now a little bit specifically about your teaching tenure, one of your schools that you are known for is during your time at Wando High School. And during your years there, for anyone who looks up the Wando High School band program, they can see that there was a large amount of growth in not only the quantity of the program, but also in the quality. So first, if we could talk about how you went about building the numbers in that program. So I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you first started, there was approximately about 108 students when you first arrived, but then the time when you left Wando, you had more than double that to being over 280 students. So how did you go about building those numbers over the years?
That's correct. Those numbers are correct. First of all, let me say, I personally didn't do anything. It takes an army of people to create a comprehensive band program, and it takes a number of people coming together to understand what it means to create a culture of excellence, to build a program. And so first and foremost, we had incredible middle school feeder directors. We had 3 exclusive feeders to Wando High School, and we had 3 amazing directors at all 3 middle schools. And so that really helps. And when I got there, and within the first 3 years, we hired 3 new middle school band directors. I believe that any high school program, if they're truly thriving, there's a great middle school band director behind that program. In addition to that, we had an amazing staff at the high school. And as we grew, when we got to 200 students, we added an assistant. And then when we got to 250, we added another assistant. So when I left, there were 3 of us at the high school. And let me add that my co-directors at Wando, Lainey Radicke and Jeff Handel, are world-class rock star teachers. You know, it takes an army of people, including incredible parents, a supportive administration. It takes a lot of things that all come together to make for a good thing. So I do think from that perspective, the program grew because we taught students to fall in love with music and music making, and we also tried to create a culture of excellence. And so through great teaching and through the culture that we were trying to create, the program did grow. And, you know, I got there in 1999, and in 2005, we won our first state marching band championship. But really, concert band was the hub of the wheel. And we stressed that concert band was the hub of the wheel. In 2007, we were very fortunate to be able to perform at the Midwest Clinic in Chicago. And through that process from 1999 through 2007, there were a lot of people who came together to set some goals that were based on instructional practices. In other words, what did we need to do in the classroom to get the young people better at being musicians, and also to get them to fall in love with music. So those are some of the things that I think helped us build the program. The other thing is I used to do something called freshman interviews. So when students would come into the band program as ninth graders, every Wednesday afternoon for 15 minutes, I would do interviews with freshmen. And I would start every interview by saying, if we're going to spend 4 years together, I really want to get to know you. And I would ask them questions like, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? Where do you see yourself 10 years from now? Who's your favorite musical artist? Just ask them all kinds of questions. But the questions were not as important as me genuinely being interested in getting to know them. And I really believe that part of the process of building the program was that over the course of 9 years of those 15 years, we had over a 97% retention rate in the program. And I think part of that was relationship building. So I think, you know, the high level of music making brought them there, and the culture kept them there.
Definitely. And that's a large topic that people have talked a lot about in the past when they've talked about building their programs here on the show, is building those relationships. That's a unique component where you mentioned with the interview process. That's really cool. So if you could elaborate on that a little bit, as far as aside from your initial contact at the beginning of their freshman year, let's say it's your second or third year with them, maybe they're a junior, what initiatives did you and the rest of the staff use to continue building those relationships and just helping the program even thrive even more?
Well, I think there are 2 levels to this. So first of all, I think sometimes people think that you have to choose between being in the people business or being in the music business, and you don't. We are in both the music business and the people business. So it's kind of a simultaneous process. From a culture of excellence standpoint, a former colleague of mine, many people may know the name Bruce Dinkins. Bruce Dinkins was a high school band director in South Carolina, and then he moved to Texas and was very successful at Bowie High School in Texas. And he used to have a sign in the front of his room that said, "To all who enter, you are subject to the relentless refining power of music through its uncompromising standards." And Bruce and I became good friends when he was here in South Carolina. Ironically enough, he also graduated from New England Conservatory. So we shared a lot of common stories. And that statement kind of exemplified, matter of fact, I asked him if I could borrow that, and I put that statement in the front of my band room as well. And that statement really explained to the students the respect that we had for the music making process. So I think that part of that idea of culture and excellence has to be taught, and students have to understand the whole idea of uncompromising standards is a synergistic process. where we're all coming together to make for a good thing. I also think that we spent a lot of time during those building years where we had people like Tim Lotzenheiser come in and do student leadership workshops. And Tim came to our school once a year, and we believed that investing in people was just as important in terms of personal skills and character traits as it was building strong musicians and getting them to fall in love with music and music making. So I think part of all those things kind of come together to create a culture of excellence.
So to talk a little bit more about that culture of excellence, too, the unique thing about the Wando program was that with a lot of the ensembles, they did reach what you can say sometimes is the highest level of achievement or excellence for that program, whether it be performing at Midwest with your top concert band or even winning a state championship with your marching band. So having that well-rounded of a comprehensive program that achieved at the highest level of what can be possible for those types of ensembles, how did you go about in building that type of comprehensive approach to excellence where, and no matter what we do, we're going to strive for the best and shoot for it together?
It was interesting. For several years, we had a parent who would go out on our football practice field and would paint, and we never knew when this was going to happen. He would paint the word excellence on the field. And it was kind of a reminder to the students that no matter what we did, I told you earlier that we believed that concert band was the hub of the wheel and everything else were spokes of the wheel. But the idea of excellence doesn't matter in what area you're referring to. So our chamber ensembles, it was about excellence. If it was a pep band, it was about excellence. It didn't matter what area we were referencing. We spent a lot of time talking about the word excellence. I also think that it's interesting that we built the program on good, sound, fundamental teaching and teaching students to have great fundamentals. But that's another one of those, and statements. Sometimes people think, it's either or, and it's not. You have to build technique and skill, and you also have to build artistry and musicianship. And those are simultaneous processes. And just like being in the people business and being in the music business are simultaneous processes. So we believe that it was important to build strong fundamentals, and we were pretty relentless about students understanding what excellence meant on a musical level, not just in terms of being expressive or creating wonderment, but also just technically being great players. The other thing that happened in the program, as the program grew, the culture of excellence spread down to the younger students. So there was an expectation when a young person came into the program that the older people took them, under their wing and put their arm around them, and they not only took care of them as people, but they kind of trained them to be great musicians as well. So success bred success in that standpoint. So when you create a high level of excellence, you're also striving to create high level people. And you're trying to create people who are selfless, who are giving, who know how to raise the bar, and who understand the concept of we, us, as opposed to I, me. So I think also part of that creating a culture of excellence are training high level people. And when you have high level people and high level musicianship happening simultaneously, you're creating a culture of excellence.
So now to continue on that a little bit, one thing that you are widely known for is your series of books, which includes Habits of a Successful Band Director, Habits of a Successful Musician, and also Habits of a Significant Band Director being the most recent. Being a widely known source for band directors and music educators everywhere, they've really turned out with a lot of great ideas. I've even implemented a lot even into my own classroom through the years. And with those being such a significant resource for educators now, can you talk a little bit about how you first came to writing these books, or even just writing books for other teachers, and then also once you started, how that led to writing the rest of your series?
Well, earlier I mentioned that Tim Lotzenheiser would come to our school once a year and do student leadership workshops. And it was actually a conversation with Tim that led to the writing of the first book, which was Habits of a Successful Band Director. Tim had been at one of the universities that he worked at earlier in the day talking to student teachers. And I had a student teacher at the time, and I went to pick him up at the airport, and we had started a conversation about student teachers and the things that they know and the things that they still need to grow in. And it was that conversation that started a dialogue about writing the first book. Later, Tim actually was associated with a company called Focus on Excellence. And Focus on Excellence was actually the company that printed the first version of Habits of a Successful Band Director. And we sold a good number of copies very fast within a 6 or 7 month period. And Tim called and said, because we're having success with the book, that he would like to call Alec Harris, who's president of GIA Publications, and pitch the book to Alec. And so he said, would you like to do that? I said, I think that would be wonderful. And so Tim called Alec. Alec called me, and I said, yes, I'd love to start this partnership with GIA Publications. And so GIA picked up the first book. And we had success with the first book, especially in university classrooms. We had a number of universities who began to pick up Habits of Successful Band Director and use it in their college methods classes. And so as the success of the books started, we just began having conversations. And the conversation started with, how do we help teachers? How do we help young teachers? And how do we help students? And as we discussed that philosophy, that's when we started writing method books in addition to what we call the how-to books, which is what we started with. And then that expanded from not just band, but into choir and into strings. So my colleagues, Chris Selby is our lead writer for our strings books, and Eric Wilkinson is our lead writer for the choral series. And so our mission really is to help teachers and help students. And we've had some wonderful success doing that.
Definitely, and with the resources too, I love the fact that they're just the type of book, and even as you've said in some of the books, with the intent of just keeping them on your desk, and once in a while, if you have that prep period, you can read through just a topic. And I love that you can address a resource and it can give you great ideas on everything from finances to working with boosters, assessment, and even just working with kids. It's a very wonderful resource. So to talk about one specific topic from one of your books, and kind of to touch on what you talked about earlier too when you're working on fundamentals, is a thing that you call your teaching inventory sheet. Could you walk us through this tool and how you utilized it to teach fundamentals to your students?
Absolutely. So I was probably in my 5th year of teaching, and I started an Excel spreadsheet. And on the left-hand side, I titled it What to Teach, and on the right-hand side, How to Teach It. And I began to take a list that I was already teaching called the Components of Playing, and I listed the components of playing. So components of playing would be like timing, tuning, tone, technique, balance, blend, articulations, dynamics, phrasing, style, musicianship, listening skills, things like that. And I made a list down the left-hand side of the Excel spreadsheet, and I left about 4 blanks in between each word. And then I went to the right-hand side under How to Teach It and just started writing teaching strategies for how I taught it. And the teaching inventory database transferred into something called the teaching inventory sheet, which I used when I did my lesson plans. So I had one teaching inventory sheet aligned to each 9 weeks of instruction. And there were several things that the teaching inventory database did for me as a teacher. One was that it kind of pushed me to continuously find ways to teach concepts. And so it caused me to kind of constantly dream about teaching strategies. In addition, I put on that list other things that were responsible for teaching. So things like key signatures and breathing exercises and accounting system. I mean, even things like concert etiquette or how to put the instrument together. I mean, there are all so many things that we were responsible for teaching. and just tried to use the teaching inventory database to kind of keep up with how things were being taught. And then the teaching inventory sheet, I used that almost as a sequence to be able to say, what I'd been able to teach over the course of the year. So one of the things that I did initially was all of my students had to know the components of playing. So they had to be able to say that the components of playing were, timing, tuning, tone, technique, balance, blend, articulation, dynamics, all those words. And I would actually have the students make a list on the board, and then I would point to a word. So let's say it was tuning. I would point to the word, and I would ask them this question: how did we teach it, or how did you learn it? And the students had to be able to articulate that. And it could be something like an assignment that we gave them. If it was tuning, like I mentioned, it could be we would give them notes that were inherently out of tune on their instrument, and then I would have them write a paper. We called it a pitch tendency paper, and they had to say what notes were inherently out of tune on their instrument, and solutions for fixing it, which may have been alternate fingerings or any number of solutions. And so they had to be able to do that for each of the components of playing. And the other part of it is that when you do your lesson plans, this will sound strange, but many times there are lesson plans that the school asks you to do, and then they're the real lesson plans, the ones that that change and evolve over time. And the teaching inventory database really allowed me to kind of monitor what I was teaching and how I was teaching it.
Definitely. So as you went over these teaching components from quarter to quarter or every 9 weeks, did any of your language or terminology change over time? And that can even go into maybe how you equip students' toolboxes with these components of playing, and maybe how you went into crossing that threshold into the music making process.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good question. So first of all, if the students had the vocabulary, in other words, when I asked them to make their list of the components of playing, they had to then be able to apply that. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that we were working on a passage from letter B to letter D in the music. We might pick the first time through, we might work just on articulations. And then the second time through, just on dynamics. And then the third time through, trying to find the arrival points of the phrases. And then the fourth time through, it may be a simultaneous performance of all three of those things. So part of that process had to be the ability for students to transfer not only the fact that they knew the components of playing, but that they could transfer those concepts into the music that they were playing. In addition to that, you ask about the vocabulary changing. Well, first of all, I think that technique and skill and artistry and musicianship have to be taught simultaneously. But I also believe that fundamentals and foundational instruction is the foundation of your house, if you will. And so, exceptional fundamentals are the foundation, but your language, when you're doing it the right way, your language changes to words like beauty, shape, interpretation, emotion, style, nuance, mood, artistry, and students need to understand what that means. So I'll just give you one technique. I would ask the students, at letter B, what does that sound like to you? So where we live, I remember one in particular student said, it reminds me of palm trees swaying in the breeze. Well, we live on the coast, and so that made sense to everybody in the room. So just having a dialogue about how does this make you feel? And asking questions, guided questions to the students that are not just, shorter, longer, louder, softer, in tune, out of tune, but really explore the idea of beauty and emotion are really, really important. Like I said, it's a simultaneous process, but my experience has been, as you indicated, that as you build fundamentals, there's almost a natural evolution towards the music making process and getting them to discover who they are and how they feel.
So now to talk a little bit about your current position as Director of Fine and Performing Arts in Dorchester District 2. Is that somewhere where you lead more of an administrative role now?
Yes, I'm administrator for a team of 153 teachers in all areas. So it's music, art, drama, and dance. One of the things that I really love about this position is I felt like that moving to this role would allow me to exponentially help more folks. And I have found that to be the case. And I particularly like working with the young teachers. We have an induction program where I get the newest teachers once a month. And I love that process. I love the collaboration. And like I said, I feel like that I have the ability to exponentially help more people. Matter of fact, this morning I was in a new teacher's room, happened to be a strings teacher, and we started talking teaching strategies. And he said, "Boy, you came at exactly the right time." And we were talking about teaching rhythm vocabulary. And in our habits books, we have rhythm charts followed by rhythms and pitches. And he just discovered that in our strings book this morning. And I showed it to him, and he was just excited about the prospect. So I really like working with young teachers, and I enjoy, like I said, the ability to exponentially try to help more folks.
So now with this new role being more of an administrative role instead of teaching full-time in the classroom, is there anything you learned about the music-making process or teaching music now from being more in this administrative role?
Well, I'll tell you something that I learned about myself. One of the things I learned about myself was that the first year out, I really missed the students themselves. I underestimated that. It's the same reason why I wanted to be a high school band director from 10th grade. And I just love that age group. And so what I do now is I'll go into a band room or, a strings room or another room like that. And I just adopt students for a day. So it's like being a grandparent. You get to work with them musically, and then you can give them back. So that's something that I learned myself, is that I still miss the interaction with the students. One of the things that I learned was that sometimes we get caught up in just our individual programs. And the role that I'm in right now, I get to see things very globally. And I'm very fortunate to be in a district where the superintendent is incredibly supportive of the arts. And so it's interesting to see all the pieces and parts of the district work together to try to, positively affect students. So the biggest shift for me was being in a role where I got to see all the pieces and parts of the district working together. And like I said, I'm very fortunate that in our district, students come first, and every decision is based on to how to make a difference in the life of a young person.
For sure. So now to move on a little bit to a quote from an article you had once stated in the past. It's really stuck out to me as something really unique in towards your philosophy of education, where you said, and I quote, "Every child has the ability to fall in love with an art form. If you're going to teach the whole child, Mozart and Michelangelo are just as important as Einstein and Shakespeare." So with that said, how would you respond to somebody if they asked you, why do we teach music in schools?
Well, first of all, we have a huge responsibility to teach students to fall in love with and resonate with music. And we want them to have a lifelong love affair with music. We also want to teach students to, as I said before, kind of artistically state who they are and how they feel. And there's tons of research that supports why we need arts education in our schools. And there's also tons of research that supports why students need music. I think one of the most important things is for students that we teach to have an intuitive response to music. One day in class, a student raised her hand and she said, "Mr. Rush, you keep talking about this intuitive response to music." She said, what do you mean by that?" And I said, "Well, are you guys willing to play a game?" And she said, "Sure." I said, "I'm going to put on some music, and when I put on the music, I want you just to do whatever your body tells you to do." And I said, "You guys willing to play this game?" They were like, "Yep, we're in." So I went over, plugged my phone into the sound system, and I hit play, and it was Earth, Wind, and Fire, September. And they just got up, so just, without me saying anything, they got up, they started dancing, they started moving. One of the trumpet players goes, da-ba-da-ba-da-da. And we just had fun for about 15 or 20 seconds, and then I hit pause, and the girl asked the question. She said, "Okay, we get it." But then we had a conversation about, what happens when you hear, the Barber Adagio for strings, or Gabriel's oboe, or, Eric Whitacre's Water Night, or the second movement of the Persichetti Symphony for band. What actually physically happens to the body? And when we get students to truly connect emotionally with music, then you really have something special. And, I do know that there is a connection to academic excellence, the arts and academics. But I think first and foremost, we need to be able to explain to people what it means, arts for art's sake, and what the study of the arts do for young people. And there's so many levels in which you could go with that. So I think first and foremost, our job is to teach them to fall in love with their art form.
Let's touch on that a little bit about getting students to fall in love with music. What advice would you have for somebody who is out teaching in a program to get them to have their students, if they don't become active performers after their academic career, but to be lifelong consumers of music and fulfill their love of music throughout their entire life?
Tim Lotzenheiser and I are doing a book that's going to be coming out fairly soon that is about climbing a mountain to create a culture of excellence. And one of the activities in the book is name 2 songs that are your life soundtrack right now. And we have a huge responsibility to get them to understand what it means to respond and react to music. And our job is to not just be the music, but to be music, if that makes sense, to our students. And if they see us passionate about music and music making, then there's certainly a chance that they will fall in love with music as well.
For sure. So you had mentioned that you were currently in the process with Dr. Tim in writing a new book, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Well, if by chance, would you be able to give us a preview of what the book will be about, or maybe when it will be available to the market for purchase?
Well, I'm not positive when it's going to be released. It's entitled Pathway to Success, Habits for Creating a Culture of Excellence. And it is a journey up the mountain, is the metaphor for the book. And the journey consists of starting at a base camp. And if you can just kind of imagine this, everybody's gathered together in a group at base camp, and they're getting an orientation meeting, and it starts with communication. So the lead hiker says, for us to get up the mountain together, we have to have great communication. And then it goes through things like attitude, honesty, trust, integrity, self-discipline, emotional health, raising the bar, like goal setting, relationships, cooperation, loyalty, and selflessness. And then the top level is creating a culture of excellence. And then there's actually a level above that, and it's called the moonshot. The moonshot is creating what isn't. And, when we wanted to send a person to the moon, the idea came first. It was, we want to put a person on the moon. And then they began to decide how they were going to get a person to the moon. And so that highest level in our book is called the moonshot. It's having students come up with ways to kind of think outside the box and truly ask how they can invest in other people. That's kind of the pathway, if you will, the pathway to success, which is the title of the book that we're working on right now. We're really excited about it, and we really think it's kind of a shift from just teaching leaders. Sometimes when we do leadership training, ultimately we just affect 10% of our group. This is really saying that everybody can create a culture of excellence. Everybody can lead based on where they are right now. So for some students, as they work through this book, they may only get up to level 2 or level 3, but by their senior year, they may get up all the way to the top of the mountain and above it. So that's kind of a quick preview of what we're working on right now.
That sounds like a great resource, Scott. So if anyone wanted to get in touch with you or look into purchasing one of your books, what would be the best way for them to do so?
I would recommend that they go to www.habitsofsuccess.com, and this will take them to my GIA page. On the right side of the page, they'll see a list of the various titles in the Habit series, and if they click on any of the titles, it will give them more specific information about each book in the series. That's also a good way for people to contact me. They can contact me directly via email from this page. In addition, there's some videos of some of the exercises from our method books, and down at the bottom of the page, there's a section titled Additional Resources that has all kinds of information that band directors can use. Matter of fact, there's a copy of my original teaching inventory database that you referenced earlier in the podcast that teachers can download.
Great. So now, to elaborate on some questions that we ask all of our guests, to start out, and you can put this in the context of marching band, concert band, whatever it may be, could you tell us about one or two of your favorite rehearsal tactics?
That's an interesting question. I will tell you that one of the things I started to do probably in the last 6 or 7 years that I was in the classroom, and I still do it today, not only with honor bands that I conduct, but I also do this. We have a summer program here in our district where we work with middle school students. And I do this with all of them, but Larry Livingston, he used to come and work with our band program at Wando. And one of the things that he used to do is he would end rehearsals by going to the piano, and I would always call it his musical gift. He would go and just do a little improvisation on the piano, and it could be any number of things. One time he worked with one of my bands, and he made up an entire story about this shy girl who played in the clarinet section named Mary. Or it could just be where he just played something that was just heartfelt. And I realized that collaboration of music making was really reaching the students. And so I also felt like that if I wanted the students to artistically state who they are and how they feel, and to bring something to the music making process, that I would try something similar. So it doesn't really matter what age group I'm working with. At some point in the process, I will bring a student over to the piano, and I'll do a little introduction on the piano. And the instructions may be something as simple as we're in the key of C, and I want you to start on Do, and we'll end on Do, and I just want you to play something meaningful and expressive and say something to the people in the room. And that may be the only instructions that I give. And we always discover something through that process. I've never done the exercise where it did not bring on a conversation about music making and about bringing a part of who you are to the music making process. It can certainly lead to conversations about the idea of collaboration. Sometimes people think that as teachers, our job is to be on the podium in the front of the room and all the information is going out to the students. And that's actually incorrect. Our job is to be like a pebble that drops in water, and the ripples from that pebble create an environment where we actually ask students to bring a part of who they are into music making. But we have to establish that environment. So that improvisation exercise that I do with students is the beginning many times of the discussion of how do they bring a part of who they are. And many times with younger groups, when they hear one of their colleagues doing it, it gives them permission to also be expressive. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean if you're conducting an ensemble of 58 students that you want 58 individual interpretations of what you're performing. But you do need an interpretation. So you can ask a question like, we've done 3 different interpretations of this passage. Which one do you like and why?
Yeah, that's a really neat tactic, Scott. Especially I really enjoyed hearing about with the collaborative aspect, dealing in with the individual expression of each student. That's really neat. So now, to go into the next one, what leaders have inspired you in your life and career, and what lessons have you taken from them?
Wow. I kind of hate this question a little bit in the sense that I'm afraid I'm going to leave someone out. But I will tell you some people who've been instrumental in my life musically and some things that I learned from them. So My two primary French horn teachers were Bob Prusen and Charles Kavallofsky. And Bob Prusen really taught me how to be a professional. And Charles Kavallofsky really taught me the orchestral repertoire. A lot of my training in that sense was orchestral. And, earlier I said, you're a product of your experiences. You can only give away what you have. And being around, Charles Kavallofsky was principal horn player of the Boston Symphony. And having his mentorship was invaluable. Also, the conductors that I had, I mentioned this earlier, but Frank Battisti and Carl St. Clair and Pascal Varot and Ben Zander were all people at New England Conservatory. Frank Battisti, he taught me so much, but later in life, as we've been friends, I went to him one time and I said, Mr. B, I said, if I would have known then what I know now, I would have lived in your office every day. And he said, no, you wouldn't, because I would have kicked you out. He said, I wouldn't have gotten anything done if you would have been there. But I learned so much from Frank Battisti and so many things that I took into the classroom as a teacher. I learned from him. And then, Carl St. Clair and Pascal Varot and Ben Zander. Ben, I played in the Boston Philharmonic while I was in school. And he's just so passionate. I just learned his passion for music and music making. There were other people. When I lived in Atlanta, Alfred Watkins and Gary Gribble were two band directors. I taught lessons at their schools because I was trying to build a French horn studio, and I knew that I needed to be in those two schools. But it turned out that both of those gentlemen became dear friends and were really kind of instrumental in helping me follow my passions to follow. I took a pay cut going from the college performing level to being a teacher. And it was the best decision I ever made. And both those gentlemen had exceptional band programs that really showed me what was possible. And so many times when I was at Wando, I would pick up the phone and call Gary or pick up the phone and call Alfred and ask them, for advice, especially as a young teacher. At the undergraduate level, Jim Copenhaver and Bill Moody were at the University of South Carolina, and they really established an incredible foundation for me. And then my high school band director, Robert Wirtz, was also instrumental because during that time when I was trying to formulate what I wanted to do, he was certainly supportive. Matter of fact, he gave me, when I started teaching some camps, he gave me a job that helped me solidify how passionate I was about teaching high school students. There's so many people that I tried to bring in to do symphonic camps. I'm a firm believer in having a symphonic camp. Just like we have, marching band camp, you should have symphonic band camp. And I brought in people like Larry Livingston and Frank Battisti and Gary Green and Rod Winther and Jack Delaney and Ray Kramer, Scott Weiss and Kevin Giraldi and Scott Teeble, and just some wonderful people. The students thought that I was bringing in all these people to, for them, and I was, but I really was bringing those people in for me as well. Like I knew that if I wanted to continue to grow and give my students an incredible experience, that I wanted to bring people in that I could learn from as well. I believe that, you're either green and growing or ripe and rotting. So our job is to continuously grow and get better at our craft.
Wow, that's certainly a list, certainly who's who the band director world. So that's really cool to hear that they've had such a big influence. So now in your current role as an administrator, I'm sure you oversee a lot of teachers in the classroom. And even throughout your career of even the people you have mentioned, you've certainly got the chance to see firsthand a lot of outstanding leaders in the classroom as well. So if you had to give 3 words that would describe an outstanding leader of a comprehensive music program, what would those words be and why?
I think, first of all, passionate. So a passionate, knowledgeable musician. I think, obviously, we have to have passion at what we do, and the students need to see that passion. I think the second one is loving, and I really mean that word love in the truest sense. I mean, I believe that a loving mentor is a champion for students and who also understands the idea of being significant. And, those two statements, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, or you must connect before you can correct. I think those two statements are so important And our words and actions have to bear that out. The third one, a change agent who believes in excellence and high standards and building a synergistic culture. Students need to know that we know our craft. They also need to know that we love them. And they also need to know that we're passionate about music and music making and passionate about them being high-level people. So I think those would be my three words: passionate, loving, and probably a change agent, for excellence.
Yeah, and I really like your response with the change agent, and especially how you mentioned with maintaining high standards. So I didn't know if you could spur off that for a moment and elaborate a little bit on how you would approach or even give advice to having high standards and having a high level of maintaining that excellence, but also doing it in a personable way with students.
Richard Saucedo tells this story, and someone asked him one time, what's your secret? And he said, 1-1. And they said, 1-1? He said, yes, 1-1. They said, you're going to have to tell me more. He goes, okay, 1.1. And they said, 1. You're going to have to tell me more. And so as he strung them along a little bit, he finally said, it's the first note of the first exercise. And what he meant was that from the very beginning, when we create sounds from silence, in other words, sound entering from silence, from the very beginning, there are certain things that we need to be zoned into. Is the sound beautiful? Is it in time? Is it in tune? Does it have a characteristic tone? There are all kinds of things. You could really make a list of those things. And when I heard him tell that story about 1-1, I said, that really is in kind of a microcosm. That's one part of creating a culture of excellence. In other words, having high standards and making students realize that we create the glass ceiling. In other words, my experience has been students are capable of whatever standards you set, they're capable of reaching those standards. There is no glass ceiling. Students can bust open the glass ceiling. I also think that the kind of relationships that you build with students are so important. A long time ago, there was kind of a dictatorial type of process of teaching, and we are so far away from that now. It really is about building relationships with young people, and they need to know that you care. And so I really think that that's part of that creating high standards and creating a culture for excellence is kind of, holding everybody's hand and say, we're in this together. And it doesn't matter what level, at Wando, one of the things that we did is we taught them all the same way. We had 4 concert band classes. We may have taught the 4th concert band class slower than we taught the top class, but we taught them all the same.
That's great advice. And to speak on advice now, too, in more of a general sense, if you had to offer any advice for any director of a thriving comprehensive program, whether it be choir, band, or orchestra, do you have anything to offer in just a general sense of advice to help students thrive in any context?
First of all, and it kind of piggybacks on some of the statements that I just made, but all means all. And every child has gold on the inside. Our job is to help them find that gold. And our job is to help them find their musical gold and their personal gold. And so, they need us to be a champion for them. The next bit of advice that I would give is kind of what I said earlier, which is never stop learning. Matter of fact, I'm enjoying learning now, I think, more than I did when I was younger. There was a time period where I wanted other people to think that I really knew what I was doing. And I was afraid to ask for help when I was a younger director. Now I just love to constantly learn. So never stop learning. The next one would be, don't be afraid to bring in outside clinicians to come in and work with your ensembles. Because I said earlier, I was a firm believer in the symphonic camp, and not just for what it would bring to the students, but for me to continue to learn. And then just understand the idea of significance. In one of the books, we use the phrase, success stops at retirement, but significance lasts forever and is how you leave a legacy. And I think we have to have an understanding that we have the ability to make a difference in the life of a young person, both musically and personally.
Definitely, and that's really cool that you mentioned about success ending at retirement, but significance being a longer factor, which actually is our last question that we ask all guests. So, and I know that your most recent book is about this, a lot about this topic too. So, whenever a student is done being in your program, whether they graduate or let's say at the time of your retirement, how would you like to be remembered as a leader for your music program?
First and foremost, I want to be remembered as someone who truly loved their students. I also want to be remembered as someone who genuinely, loves music and music making. I have 58 former students that are in the profession of music, which I'm very proud of, but I have many more students who just love music. And I hope that, I had something to do with that.
Excellent. So again, Scott, that wraps up everything we have. I'd like to thank you very much for your time, your wisdom and insight. It's been a great conversation. And also just to remind our listeners, if they would like to check out any of your publications, they are available through giamusic.com. Is that correct?
That's right, giamusic.com.
Okay, great. So other than that, thank you very much again for all of your time and all the best on your upcoming school year.
Thank you so much, Doug.
This concludes our episode. Many thanks to Mr. Scott Rush for sharing his time, wisdom, and insight on being a leading advocate and author in the music education profession. If you enjoyed this podcast, please make sure to subscribe to our page on Facebook under Director's Circle and also subscribing to us on iTunes, Google Play Music, and iHeartRadio to stay updated on all future episodes. This is Doug Conrad saying thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to tune in to the next edition of Director's Circle.